Hi, I'm Ron, and welcome to Countersteer. We're a podcast where we try to give bite-sized chunks of automotive history. We're a new podcast, so if we fumble something along the way, please forgive us. I find cars fascinating, and I hope that you will too. And with that now, let's get started on the Datsun 240Z. The 240Z, a car that made Americans realize Japanese cars could also be cool, and not just these boring, reliable econo boxes, right? But before we dive into this massive icon, set the scene. Picture, right? Late 1960s America, muscle cars absolutely rule the streets, big engines, all that kind of stuff. European sports cars they're kind of prevalent, but they're really in the fancy end of town, you know. Japanese cars, those are like the funny little things your like frugal neighbor drives, like not that big of a deal, right? Okay, now enter Yutaka Katayama, lovingly known as Mr. K, this absolute mad lad who decided Nissan needed to shake things up in the US market from their boring, reliable cars, right? Now, Nissan was already selling cars in America under the Datsun name, just as like testing the waters, right? Of like if it fails, it's not associated with Nissan and their actual name, right? Okay, but like let's be real, they weren't exactly like setting hearts racing with their cars. Kind of boring, right? But Mr. K had this amazing vision. Picture, right? A sleek, affordable sports car that could take on the likes of Jaguar and Porsche and these other massive European brands without breaking the bank, while also still having that, Datsun reliability and practicality for everyday use. And so, Project Z was born. Dun dun dun. So, the design team, led by Yoshihiko Matsuo, I'm not Japanese, please forgive me. Basically, they got to work, right? And so they drew inspiration from all over, right? And so there's a bit of Jaguar type here, a dash of Ferrari there. Maybe if you squint, you can see some Corvette. I don't know. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? I guess. Okay, but what emerged, right, was something uniquely Japanese and actually like utterly gorgeous. Beautiful car. Right? And so when the 240Z finally broke cover in 1969, it was like someone dropped this like supermodel into a room of like normal people, right? So you had this massive long hood, this short deck, and those like scooped headlights. Beautiful automotive perfection, right? On a budget, albeit. But yeah. And speaking of budget, right, this is where things kind of get wild. So the 240Z launched with a price tag of $3,526. Something inflation, 26,000 in today's money, which actually like not that expensive when you look at it. And so comparison, right? A Porsche 911, a brand new one back then, would have set you back nearly twice as much. Talk about value for money. I mean, come on. So under that massive long hood, right, there was this 2.4 liter inline six engine, 151 horsepower, not that much today, but like, I mean, the car weighs 2,300 pounds, give or take. And come on, it was back then. Like, that was plenty to get your heart racing, and it was beautiful. And so it made this beautiful noise as well. Amazing crafted engine. What can you not love, right? And so the car hit the American market like a typhoon, right? Massive instant hit, demand far outstripping all the supply, right? Dealerships, kind of like today, or like 2020s, something Porsche dealerships, massive marking ups were made, and then people were on massive waiting lists. Absolute madness, right? And so in the first year, Datsun sold 16,000 240Zs just in the US. By 1971, that number had almost doubled, right? More than doubled, actually. And so the more than doubled, yeah, but there's an asterisk, exact sales figures slightly depending, blah blah blah, right? Okay. But the 240Z, right, wasn't just like, pretty face, sweet engine, blah, blah, right? Like on the outside, it actually like was able to do stuff. It had good handling, right? So it had, that fully independent suspension, and it had that front mid-engine layout, which actually gave it a pretty good balance against, many sports cars of the days that were like really expensive, right? That people could only dream of. And of course, this led to massive success in motorsports and like grassroots racing, because it was this entry into affordable racing, right? And so this led to like a highly competitive SCCA racing scene, and it actually even won the grueling East African Safari Rally in 1973. It was a modified version, but like, you get the gist, right? So as the years went on, of course the Z evolved as cars do. There was different generations. There's the 260Z came along in 1974, followed by the 280Z, pretty popular as well, in 75. And so they're improving, right? So each iteration got a little bit more power, a little more luxury, a little more heavy, but it is what it is, right? But that, like, I feel like that original Z magic was never quite replicated of the early days, really. And so talking about the impact of the car, right? You can't really overstate it, right? It, like, basically single-handedly, right, changed the perception of Japanese cars in America, excluding, like, the 2000 GT, which nobody heard of, insanely expensive, blah, blah, right? It was this brand new affordable car which changed the perspective of so many, and they weren't just, and so people, like, in America, right, they didn't look at these cars as just like, oh, these cheap cars and cheerful, right? But they're also, like, desirable and they're aspirational and they're, like, cool looking. And so it paved the way for, like, future sports car legends, I would say, from Japan, of, like, you know, people that, like, stand in the 90s, right? So you have, like, the Supra, the RX-7, GTR, stuff like that. It really was, like, the godfather for all this. And so, like, today as well, like, online websites like Breaker Trailer and stuff, like, pristine 240Zs, eye-watering prices at auction. And it's like, that's not bad for a car that was once seen, like, as a cheap alternative to a Porsche, being, like, half its price, right? So I feel like this just goes to show sometimes, like, the underdog really does come out on top. And so wrapping up, so next time, if you ever see a 240Z cruising down the street, they are kind of rare, I can't lie, getting kind of sparse. Just give it a nod of respect, you know? It's not just this amazingly cool car, right? But it's this piece of automotive history, like, changed the game itself, right? Which not a lot of cars can say they did. And it's pretty beautiful, right? I think one of the coolest shapes in a car ever. And so that wraps up another episode of Countersteer. Hopefully you learned something new or just had something to listen to. I'm thinking the next episode will be on the 300 SL, but that just depends if I find something cooler between now and then. Thanks so much for listening.